You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's going on, Los Angeles, and welcome to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, your destination for Los Angeles football. I'm Ryan Dyer, joined as always by Jamal Badney, and this is your RamsHouse segment of the show. Excited. I might sound rare, but we are excited to talk about the Rams because we think they played a valiant game. You know, it's in sports a lot, Jamal, that there are no culture wins or moral victories, but this certainly felt like a moral victory based on where this team is. 26-10 loss to the juggernaut that is the Kansas City Chiefs. And we're going to get all into it right now. Jamal, as I mentioned in co-host, what's up, brother? How we doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing well, Rye. Excited to break this down and talk some Rams with the Ramily and jump right into it. Always such a pleasure to be able to talk with you during this fine Monday evening.
Always. Show, as always, brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use the promo code BELIEVE. It's going to give you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That means if you put $100 in on your deposit, you get $50 free to play with and bet on anything, any football, baseball, hockey, basketball, cricket, whatever they got on BetOnline, which is pretty much everything you can bet on. Once again, that's betonline.ag, mobile or desktop, either or. Promo code BELIEVE. It's going to give you a 50% welcome bonus. Tell them the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. Jamal, it's throwing me off now. We're on, we record all these separately, but we're on 3 segments, and you've got the holly right behind you, but the way it's situated, you look like a mad scientist with the way the tree is just sticking up in your hair. I've noticed it for a while, and I thought it was your hair for a while, but I'm like, no, Jamal's got that flowing, I don't know what you use, if it's head and shoulders or whatever, but the flowing mane.
How about here? There it is. I'm in the center now. There it is.
Now you look like Jim Carrey and Ace Ventura, but even better. Can't complain.
Oh, love that. We got to keep it light, Ryan. I want to keep you on your toes. You know, it's nice that you keep noticing me. You know, it's like a great relationship after the years. When the partner sort of notices the other still, that's when you know you got something magical. So very happy that we have a magical LAFB dynamic, my friend.
Yes, I wanted to do this through the camera and just like lick my fingers and cowlick it down, but knowing it's the holly, it's good. We watched since we're on the Christmas, I got my eggnog going right now. We watched since we talk Christmas movies all the time, we watched a new Hallmark Christmas movie called Hauling in the Holly last night. Just throwing it out there if you and the wife are looking for another one. I'm on like 25 now, Jamal.
Make, Ryan, in terms of holiday movies, you guys sound like you're about 26 deep in the holiday movies this year.
I think we're at like 25. It's like just crushing the game. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. So, but happy holidays, my brother. I know we talked another segment, but glad to hear Thanksgiving was great. Busy, but great, and got to spend time with family. It was good over here on the Dyer residence as well, and excited that the football season runs on. We didn't talk about this on the other segments, but in terms of just Thanksgiving football, I feel like we had some really good football games. I feel like lately we haven't had that. Like I remember seeing the last couple Thanksgivings, you see the tweets of everyone like, oh, NBA Christmas is so much better than NFL Thanksgiving. I feel like this year, all 3 games were actually pretty damn good.
No doubt, right? I mean, we started it off there in the morning, and then I thought that Cowboys-Giants game was terrific, and really all throughout the weekend, and stretching obviously into college. I mean, some amazing games this Thanksgiving weekend, and really that's the treat. The feast and the games is really what it's all about. And speaking of this Cowboys-Giants, Ryan, I mean, are we going to be in a scenario where all 4 NFC East teams are going to make the playoffs? I mean, if the playoffs started today, that would be the case, which would be an absolutely historic moment for the league. So that's something to monitor and look out for in the weeks to come.
Well, and for it to happen, so it'd be very hard to happen anyway, but for it to happen with that division,
right,
based on what everyone expected, would just be shocking. And which is why I love the NFL so much, because no one expected that. The 2 divisions that everyone thought that had a chance to happen are both dumpster fires in the NFC West and the AFC West. And you have the NFC least that has now become the NFC beast all of a sudden with how good they are. So it's crazy. And yeah, hats off to those players and coaches and what they've done and whatnot. And hopefully for our sake, for LA football's sake, which we think we kind of have talked to them all over the last few months, we think it's shifting anyway, but hopefully that means that there's no shot of Lincoln Riley going to Dallas if they keep winning. And then there's no way they can fire McCarthy. So that just means whether Lincoln Riley's at USC or maybe the Rams one day, he's staying in LA. So we're good there. But looking at this Rams game, 26-10, you have your third string quarterback starting. Obviously Cooper Kupp out. Just before the game comes out, Allen Robinson's not playing. Comes out after the game, foot surgery. He's done for the year. Not that he's been spectacular anyway, but still is a body, a comparable body out there to catch the football. You look at the offensive line injuries, obviously. There's still defensive injuries. I honestly think 26-10 against the potential Super Bowl favorites. I mean, either of these guys balled their asses off, in my opinion.
Ryan, it was the best game of the year. It was the game of the year for the Rams, in my opinion. That's ridiculous in terms of how it sounds. I challenge our viewers and our listeners to give me a better game that the Rams played, given the circumstances. They got blown out in Kansas City. They got blown out in every other game. Even the 3 victories have been lackluster, to say the least. The competitive spirit, the fire, the tenacity this team showed against Kansas City, if they had only shown this level of effort and engagement at the start of the year when they were healthy, we would be having a much different conversation. You're talking about going up against Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid, this potent Kansas City team at home, 5 red zone possessions, Ryan, and they only gave up 1 touchdown. And then when you talk about the improvement of Bryce Perkins over the course of that game, I thought he had a terrific first drive of the second half where he started to get comfortable. We rolled him out some. He found Tutu Atwell on that beautiful 4th and 2 play where he kept his poise. He actually changed hands with the ball. He found Van Jefferson a couple times, punched that in. I mean, this thing was a 2-possession game for the longest time. A couple interceptions there at the end that didn't allow the Rams to kind of threaten anymore. But 26-10, this was the game of the year for the Rams. This is the best I've felt about the Rams all year. And hopefully they can build upon this with Perkins moving forward into that Seahawks game, because I would love to see Perkins be solidified as the number 2 starter on this team going into next year. And who knows, Ryan, the way things shake out and what happens with Matt Stafford in terms of his long-term future and how he thinks about his life and his career. I mean, it's not inconceivable to think that Perkins may be a bridge starter for a year in terms of transitioning eras. So I think getting him the reps now is going to pay dividends later. I love the way he competed. I love the relationship with Sean McVay, who, oh, by the way, almost got TKO'd before the game even started. I mean, someone needs to check whether he has a broken jaw or not. I thought McVay competed with a broken jaw, coached his best game of the year. I thought the team played their best game of the year. And I'm so excited. I can't even believe I'm this excited about a team that's 3-8 and the worst defending champion in the history of the NFL. But that's where I am, Ryan, because the Rams have given me something to be excited about.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's what you want to see when the season gets to this point, 3-7 going into this game, now 3-8, when you have the injuries you have, you want to just see your team competing. And this was never a question, but you start seeing when these teams are down, like, is the coach losing the locker room? Have these guys cashed it in and whatnot? And that was never a question, because we know Sean McVay in all his deficiencies this year, which we've highlighted a lot of, but we all know that he's definitely not losing that locker room. Like, he is the heart and soul of the Rams, the organization. It'll be a very different looking organization when Sean McVay is not on the sidelines, because he literally created Los Angeles football for this Rams team, for the pro team in general. I know there was 1 year Jeff Fisher, but that's kind of, everyone wants to forget that 1 year. And Sean McVay built what we know as professional football in Los Angeles, being here, obviously, a year before the Chargers game too. So that was never a question, but it's still so great to see. And obviously you're seeing players that have never had an opportunity, so they're going to be competing their butts off. But they went up against, for lack of better words, the best team in the AFC. I still think the Chiefs are better than the Bills as of right now. Those will probably be the two teams in the AFC Championship game, most likely, but we'll see. But the Chiefs at this point have proven more, have done more, have a better record. And so they went toe to toe with them in Arrowhead, which is arguably top 2 hardest places to play in football. And it was a game for almost the entire game. Never once did I think the Rams were going to win the game. Never once was I sitting there like, all right, this is our opportunity to come back and steal the lead. But never once was I really upset. I was like, man, because you have to, and I know it's hard for fans to do this, but you have to see what guys are playing against what guys. And there's no way, shape, or form that the likes of who was on offense for the Rams had any shot against the likes of who was on defense in the Chiefs. I know there's those great stories, Rocky Balboa in, Rocky 1 or Rocky 4 against Russia and whatnot, where the huge supreme underdog can knock out the opponent and have that. But A, I know they play in Hollywood. This isn't Hollywood. And this wasn't played in Hollywood. It was played in Kansas City. And B, football is a little bit different in terms of when you have your 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th stringers playing. That's not necessarily an underdog. You probably aren't even supposed to be on the same field. And yet these guys competed their butts off and played really hard. So kudos to Sean McVay for getting these guys up, getting ready. Kudos to these players for really showing out. And on Bryce Perkins, because you mentioned him, and, hats off to him for a game he played. I think we've seen a decent amount of him, at least in preseason, and I've been at training camp and whatnot. I don't think there's any way, obviously he could get more reps and get more practice, but I think he's shown he's not ever going to be an NFL quality passer in that sense. I mean, had 2 interceptions in this game, threw for, 100 yards on the dot, 13 for 23. So I don't think he'll ever get that NFL quality from a passer, but he is athletic enough, Jamal, to where, he will never be a franchise quarterback. But he can be a spot starter in the sense because he brings enough dynamic dynamicism. Is that a word?
I don't think so. No.
Well, enough dynamic ability. Yeah. Where he can be a spot starter. He can do enough with his arm to keep the defenses honest. And obviously he can do a lot with his legs. Had some great runs there. One of his best runs, Jabal, was for a 2-yard loss where he escaped getting sacked like 3 times, ends up running out of bounds on the right sideline, right hash. And it ends up being considered a sack, but is one of his greatest runs. But you mentioned it, the great decision-making, the 4th down play. We saw Tutu Atwell get involved on more than just a 60-yard bomb, which A, is refreshing to be, but B, shows the fact that, hey, in practice, those 2 guys actually play with each other. Like Bryce Perkins is throwing the Tutu Atwell in practice because they're not your QB1 and wide receiver 1, 2, or 3. So there's a little bit more of chemistry there. So, not a ton of good in terms of chances of winning a game, but a lot of good to take away in terms of competing and in terms of what we talked about going into this game, Jamal, which was we really want to see these players building up for next year, building their resume, seeing who can stay, who can go, who we can build around and stuff like that. I think we got all of that on Sunday and more.
Look, Ryan, let's make one thing very clear. This game between the Chiefs and the Rams was a matchup where the Chiefs were Muhammad Ali and the Rams were Rocky Balboa after having gone 15 rounds with Ivan Drago and another 15 rounds with Mr. T. That's what this matchup was. Okay. So I had predicted this would be a 30-16 final only because the Chiefs would be bored and not care enough. And if they actually cared and wanted to put an A game effort out there, it could have been 60-7. But the reality of what I saw here, Ryan, is the Chiefs sleepwalked a little bit in the first quarter and a half, but they were trying to score in that red zone. And the Rams stood up and stopped them on 4 different occasions from getting a touchdown and getting an interception off of Mahomes in the end zone as well. I thought they competed terrifically. I thought Donald was his superb self. I love the face mask on Mahomes that he got there late in the game. Really showed that fight and physicality. And just given the personnel. Look, we were down to Van Jefferson and Tutu Atwell as our 2 receivers. It's Kyren Williams and Cam Akers in the backfield. It's Bryce Perkins at quarterback. And this is the 11th different offensive line combination for the Rams this year, which is 4 more than any other team in the NFL. So the adversity this team has had to go up against in this game was absolutely staggering. And again, from an effort perspective, this was the game of the year. And Ryan, it also sort of begs the question, I don't want to tease it too much, but if Stafford doesn't come back next year for a variety of reasons, I'm sure we'll get into a ton of that in the offseason, and the Rams really want to get into the Caleb Williams sweepstakes and maybe tank a little bit next year, then guess what? I want Bryce Perkins as my quarterback more than just a spot starter and really position that rebuild properly. And so getting him that experience and getting him those reps, I think, was important. And I just want to see this level of effort, Ryan, for the rest of the season. Look, the reality is the Rams may win another game or two. I'd be shocked if the Rams won more than 2 games the rest of the way here, going 2 out of the next 6. But this is the effort we want to see in terms of who are the guys that really want to come back and you build this core around for 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how good is Detroit feeling right now, holding on to the Rams' first-round pick? They're not necessarily a playoff caliber team, but they're definitely building something in Detroit. There's some special things. They should have beaten Buffalo on Thanksgiving, and now they're sitting with a 3rd overall pick currently, just to add on. I mean, Jared Goff, and this is way off topic here, but I think Jared Goff has played fairly well for that team, but they'll have their pick of either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud if they want him, most likely, unless this thing really turns around for the Rams. And basically said, here's Stafford, and then we'll have a 2-year loan, basically, and then go get our QB for the next 15 years. So could work out great for them too, Jamal.
Ryan, think about this, that the Lions are sitting with the number 3 pick right now after getting rid of Matt Stafford.
Yeah, don't
and
say
the
it.
Seahawks are sitting at the number 4 pick after having gotten rid of Russell Wilson. I mean, who would have thought that these are the 2 teams after getting rid of these franchise quarterbacks are in a position to get their next quarterback of the future here moving forward. You know, the Seahawks were the butt of all jokes in the offseason with Drew Lock and comparing him to all of the other quarterbacks in the NFC West. And they could be in a position now to get Bryce Young and or CJ Stroud and or build this team through defense as they've done historically. So like you mentioned, Ryan, this is what makes the NFL so special. Just when you think you know, you don't know. And this season has been a testament to that in so many ways, particularly in LA.
Let's touch on that for a second, since there's not a ton to talk about in this game. So let's say, the Rams win 1 or 2 more games. Seahawks are going to get a top 5 pick, most likely that means. And Geno Smith has obviously played great. I don't know if they think he's going to be there. This isn't a Seahawks podcast by any means, but I don't think they probably see him as their franchise QB, but I think he's played good enough to earn, an extension or some seasons as a starter. But I don't know if he's that guy. I don't think Pete Carroll would tell you. I don't think John, their GM, would tell you that he's like the guy that's going to win them a Super Bowl necessarily. So if they were to go and draft a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young, that is also very interesting for the Rams, because we've talked about, like, do you go all in one more time next year, or do you start building for the future? And if you go all in next year and it fails, again, it worked last year, great, but then now we're talking about next year and it fails. Well, now you're going up against Niners who, again, the jury's out on Trey Lance, but we'll say for the sake of argument, they have their quarterback for the next 15 years in Trey Lance. The Seahawks now have their quarterback for the next 15 years in either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. Cardinals, for how bad and whatever they've been, they're probably going to replace their coach. They still have their quarterback for the next 15 years. So now if you're the Rams, you really have to think about, is it worth going all in if you fail, or do we need to really think about the next 10 years so we're not the doormat of this division? I mean, it's a really interesting kind of thought now, just thinking, I didn't even think about that, the fact that the Seahawks could draft their quarterback of the future, even winning the division.
Ryan, it's such an interesting point, and I want to say something earlier when you said we're not a Seahawks podcast. We're an NFL podcast now. Okay, that's what happens when you have a team that's 3-8. So for the next 6 weeks, we are an NFL podcast. But it's such a fascinating point that you bring up, because you can flip that on its head as well, in the fact that Trey Lance, you look at a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud and a Kyler Murray in most likely a new system, because if Cliff Kingsbury saves his job somehow, he might as well go work at Magic Castle, because that's going to require a Houdini trick that we haven't seen yet in the history of modern civilization. But on the flip side, all 3 of those quarterbacks are either going to be first-year starters, or breaking into a new system. So if you can have Matt Stafford back for a year as a veteran quarterback, you can probably win that division just off of the growing pains of the other team. So I wouldn't think about it as needing to sort of cave next year. On the contrary, it would actually give me more confidence in just the window for next year because we're catching the division at the right point for ourselves, being a more veteran team. And so for me, then that would make it more likely where I would be a little bit more conservative and incremental in terms of who to build around. Make sure that I'm preserving my picks for the future because I'm really thinking about this band of brothers coming back for just 23. And ultimately, Ryan, that decision is going to rest on what does Stafford want to do next year? What does McVay want to do next year? What does Donald want to do next year, right? If those three guys want to collectively come back, you have your core back. You want to see who emerges over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Maybe make an incremental move or two, but not go all in like you did last time because the window is so short here. You're talking about a 1-year window, really, because all three of those guys have flirted with retirement in a very serious way. So this window is not going to last very long. But if 2 or 3 of those guys say, we're calling it a career, I think the first thing I do at that point is then trade Jalen Ramsey for a lot of draft capital and really accelerate that rebuilding process. So for me, I think I would really look at, what those guys want to do. But I think the 3 young quarterbacks in the division actually gives me hope that we have one more crack at this thing. And then on the other side, Ryan, how crazy would it be? The 3 best quarterbacks in college football this year, pretty unarguably, Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young. In 2 years, how crazy would it be if all 3 of those guys were in the NFC West? I mean, that would be the dream scenario there for West Coast football.
Yeah, wild. And all 3 of them being from Los Angeles originally.
Exactly.
Yeah, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, obviously, or Bryce Young being from Mater Dei. And where'd CJ play again? I'm drawing up. He wasn't Centennial. He was.
No, where was CJ? But it was definitely Orange County down here.
Yeah.
For
Sure. Definitely Orange County or definitely the LA area. And then obviously Caleb being not originally, he was from Washington, but now playing at SC. So that'd be very ironic in itself. But no, I mean, that's a great point because now, I mean, this offseason is going to be so huge for this franchise. And obviously we still have a lot of games to talk about this year and we will do that. But when you look at the future, I think me and you at this point, I wasn't there yet 4 weeks ago, but I think I'm there now where I think regardless of what happens, if McVay, Donald, and Stafford come back, I think next year's it though. I think they might come back for one more year and that's it. I can't see anything past next year. And so it really, as you mentioned, all depends on that. If they come back next year and they have that one more chance to go, quote unquote, all in, but you have to be smart about it because you know that this is their last year. And if you go too much all in, you are going to be the bottom of not just the division, the bottom of football for maybe 4 to 5 years if you dig yourself too deep. So you have to be able to go all in while still preserving the future. And there's no doubt they can do that because when you look at this team, and Jamal, you've been very vocal about it and you've been very right about it. I mean, the talent, there was definitely a talent discrepancy on this roster compared to last year's Super Bowl roster. However, it wasn't a huge discrepancy. It was a piece here or there, an upgrade here or there, which they can get in free agency. They don't necessarily have to trade a first round pick for a quote unquote blue chip player at that position. I mean, they sign a veteran left tackle over Noteboom. Boom, that's an upgrade. They draft another guard in the draft. Boom, that's an upgrade. They draft a center in the draft. Boom, that's potentially an upgrade. They add a different gadgety receiver. That's an upgrade. They don't necessarily have to trade a first round pick for the likes of, your top flight receiver, top flight corner, whatever, which everyone kind of thinks about as the all-in mentality. And I think they can do that if those 3 pieces you mentioned come back. If they don't, or one doesn't, whether it be Stafford or Donald, then it might be the looks of like, okay, well, we're not going to tank, but yes, let's start bevving our draft picks to make a move to get a Caleb Williams in 2024 and whatnot, and see how this thing really looks in 2-3 years where, like you said, we could see 3 new quarterbacks in this division in 2 years, which it could be fascinating, but also a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I think you said it best. You can make upgrades without mortgaging the future, because you have to acknowledge the level of injuries that have taken place and that the fixes can be relatively quick. And so I think that it's very important that the Rams don't get overly aggressive in mortgaging the future. I would be very against that. But I think there's an opportunity for a series of incremental moves in free agency and in the draft in particular to give yourself one more crack at it with this core, if this core so chooses to have one more crack at it in 23, or decide this is it, we got our ring, we got our money, we're in a good spot. And so that's what's going to make this offseason so fascinating.
And here's an example, and we can end with this. Just exemplifying that you can go all in without mortgaging the future. When you look at the Chiefs, and obviously it all starts with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Like that's, I mean, you're not going to find a better pairing than that really in all of football. As great as McVay and Stafford are, as great as Sean Payton and Drew Brees were, as great as Belichick and Brady are, when you just look at pure offensive ingenuity, you're not going to find much better than Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. So it starts with that. But they were outdone by, yes, you can argue Brady, but they were outdone by Todd Bowles and that Buccaneers defense in that Super Bowl. And it all started with the offensive line. So what did the Chiefs do? They didn't mortgage the future, getting all these first round picks for these blue chip players, these high profile names, but they completely overhauled the offensive line through the draft, getting great draft picks. And, you know, a guy that Rams passed on, and Creed Humphrey, adding guys through trade where they traded draft picks, but not high end first round draft pick. They signed big name guys in free agency, to the note of, Joe Thuney out of New England at the time. They have 5 different starters in the offensive line now than they did in that Super Bowl just 2 short years ago. Obviously, everyone knows the Rams' biggest weakness, partially due to injury, but partially those are guys that they've been banking on for years and continue to get injured, is the offensive line. So it could be very as simple as overhauling the offensive line, and now this team is right back near the top of the NFC. So you can do that without trading your 2024 first-round pick, your 2025 first-round pick, and whatever. You just have to be smart in how you draft, how you allocate money for free agents, and obviously how you retain players and analyze those players and whether or not those players can, A, remain healthy, and B, probably shouldn't get extensions after starting 3 games total of their career, a la Joe Noteboom. So I think that's how this team can really get back on track, Jamal, is really retooling the offensive line in a very simple way. Just look at what the Chiefs did.
No doubt, Ryan. And I think it's going to add an incredible dimension now to Les Snead. And we've talked about this a couple weeks ago he's been the Steinbrenner, Jerry Buss, let's go all in kind of guy. But what this offseason is going to require is a very different strategy and a very different understanding of football tactics. And how well he's going to draft, I think, is going to be very paramount. And I think the jury is still out on Les Snead's draft history with the Rams, where obviously he got Aaron Donald and some other big names, but he's also whiffed quite a bit on some first-round picks as well and later-round picks as well. So if he can identify the right talent at the offensive line and potentially the pass rush, this team, we've seen it, Ryan. There is at least 50% turnover year after year with NFL playoff teams. Next year is going to be no different. Nobody is that out of it, and nobody is that in it year over year unless you have a Mahomes for the next 10 years. So a couple of quick fixes can get this team back into contention for one more year with this score, but you got to make the right moves. You can't whiff on the draft and be able to get back in the mix and expect to do so.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say, and we'll end up, and it was, I'm probably going to butcher his last name, but Frake Fidel on Twitter brought it up to me, and I've thought about it, but haven't really said it. I don't think anyone's really talked about how big of a loss Brad Holmes was in that scouting department. And obviously he's now the GM of Detroit, and you can kind of see what they're building and really and doing up there. And that is going to be the big hurdle for Les Snead and company to get over. Is we talk about all the losses Sean McVay deals with on his coaching staff, which we've talked about in multiple episodes now, losing Kevin O'Connell, losing your offensive line coaches, losing defensive coordinators, all this, and they've had to overcome that. But we haven't seen yet. This is now going into this offseason will be the second offseason without Brad Holmes as kind of Les Snead's right-hand man. Can he get over that and, draft better and scout better and have whoever took his place kind of be that integral role. So that, Jamal, is going to be huge, is if they can get over that, because that's a loss I think has been really understated how big that loss was.
Yeah, him and O'Connell, right? I mean, we've talked about it. It's a lot of these unsung heroes who are sort of behind the scenes, guys that are going to challenge the thinking of the Sean McVays, guys that are going to challenge the thinking of the Les Sneads through data, through research, through watching the film, through preparation, through strategic insights. And that's what makes a great organization tick year after year. And I think those filling in those gaps, I think is going to be key moving forward. We saw it this year on the field. Let's see what transpires off the field in terms of draft preparation and getting ready for 23.
Absolutely. So, all right, Rams fan. Well, hey, this was remarkably fun for talking about another loss in a 3-8 football team. Still a lot to be proud of with this team. Still a lot to look forward to this team. And hey, guess what? We still got to watch football on Sundays. That's the beauty of it. And that's what I think. We get to hang out at SoFi on home games, 72,000 strong tailgate. Make sure to check out our new tailgate takeover show with Brittany Betts and Paula B. Having a lot of fun down there. Jamal and I get to talk about it every week, which we certainly love. So thank you all for tuning in. As always, thanks for the support. If you don't already, make sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We are on YouTube. Just go to Rams LAFB, or obviously on the website, LAFBnetwork.com. We'll be back later in the week to preview our next Rams game. We'll do our best to bring the optimism back, but this team is still going to play next week, and it should be a fun one. So we'll talk to you all then. For Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dyrud. Thanks, Ramley. Talk to you soon.